Perfect. Thank you, Darsh. Thank you, Product Buds, for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. I mean, how many people do we have right now? I think it's around 70, 75 all over the world. It's a huge honor, and I really appreciate the opportunity to just speak through some of the lessons I've learned during my time at Microsoft as a PM. So to kick things off, I thought I'd give a little bit of background, some of my school and PM background, kind of how I got into my role at Microsoft. I started at Washington University in St. Louis. I don't know if we have any WashU folks on the call, but I studied computer science, where I got both my BS and my MS. And I had two internships at a startup company in Chicago called Prevail Health Solutions. They had a mission to provide online therapy for returning veterans who were suffering from PTSD and had trouble getting therapy or getting help outside of the house. We built some solutions there, and I was a dev intern. I worked on their mobile app and their mobile web experience. And then between undergrad and grad school, someone had recommended me for Microsoft when I was one of my classmates as an undergrad, and I ended up interviewing. I planned to go in to interview as a dev. I didn't really know what the PM role was, but as I talked to my interviewer, he kind of explained to me some of the ins and outs of being a PM, and I realized, hey, I think this is a really great role for me. So I ended up applying for that, and I got my internship working on Windows Phone. I worked on the search capability in the messaging app, the SMS and MMS app that's in box on the Windows Phone. It was a really great experience. I really loved it, and I got a full-time offer. And after grad school, I came back to Microsoft, and I've been here ever since. So I returned to my previous team when I came back, and I worked on the messaging experience on a variety of different features on Windows Phone 8, which was super fun. Working on a phone experience is really fun because it's personal. It's always in your pocket. You use it all the time, and it was a really great start just to building products that people love and people use every single day. Soon, the Windows Phone organization actually merged with the Windows organization, and we built one set of software that could scale from phone to tablet to PC. And on that team, I worked on the messaging app as well. And one of the first big features I got to work on actually was the capability to send and receive messages on your PC through your phone via the cloud. And it was my first time really building something end to end. Well, while we were working on it, it was actually before Apple and Google had announced their similar features. So it was exciting to be working on something that was very prevalent in the industry. And that's something that we were able to deliver. And then, eventually Windows Phone ended up becoming deprecated, and Microsoft focused on building software solutions for other platforms. And at that time, I worked on the people experiences on Windows. Essentially, whenever there's a profile or a person shows anywhere in an inbox experience, my team kind of managed how that works and how that shows up. And then in January of 2017, about 4 months before Microsoft Teams launched, I joined Microsoft Teams. And from there, I worked on a variety of communication and collaboration features for a couple of years. Things like the wiki experience, if you've used Teams before, some of the inbox collaboration experiences that you can pin to a channel. I worked on some of our UX framework and our embedded experiences to allow chat to be rendered in different apps across Microsoft. And then I worked on our targeted communication story as well. After that, I spent about a year and change as the chief of staff for our VP of product, which was a very interesting experience. As a chief of staff, people always ask me, like, what are you doing now? And people don't quite understand what the role is. And I kind of describe it as you're a PM, but instead of for a product, you're a product only, you're a PM for a person and you're a PM for an organization. You're focusing more on growing an organization, building its rhythm, working on more future-looking product strategy. And it gave me an opportunity to fly at a different altitude that I wasn't flying at before as a product PM. So I really enjoyed that experience. And then as of the beginning of this year, I am now one of the PM leads for our mobile app for Microsoft Teams. My team manages our UX framework, the common UX and the shell of Microsoft Teams on mobile, along with some of our growth initiatives, both expanding our current base and then growing to new user segments. So yeah, my internship, it was a random person had recommended me, and it sort of brought me on this trail. Now I live in Bellevue, and this is where I met my wife, and we have a kid. So my entire life kind of got kicked off by that internship. So I'm really appreciative of the time that I've had. So more importantly than my background or what I've done is who I'm not. And I want to be super transparent with everybody. I'm not a professor. I never studied computer science, or sorry, studied product management. I studied computer science. Back when I was in school, there weren't really PM classes. And a lot of the stuff that I learned was on the job. You know, I'm not a scholar. There's thousands of books written about being a PM. I haven't read almost all of them, but I have worked with really great people and I've worked with great products. So, you know, I recommend continuing to learn, continuing to talk to folks, whether it be your peers, mentors, managers, etc. So here are some of my top lessons learned. This isn't meant to be the end all be all. Every company, every organization, every team is different. If you talk to any other PM, their list may look completely different, and they may be, you know, equally helpful, maybe even more helpful from what I'm gonna talk about. You know, think about this as a data point. Continue to talk to folks. Continue to listen. Something that I learned early as a PM is that when you show any list, people will ask you how it's sorted. Is it sorted by priority? Is it sorted by staging, by the roadmap? And like a good PM, I included how I'm sorting this list. It's roughly ordered by the product lifecycle from beginning to end, and some of the tips and tricks I've learned along the way. So the first one is customer, customer, customer. It's the most important part of any product. Without the customer, you'd have nothing to build. You wouldn't know what to build. We would have nothing to actually do day in and day out as PMs. And the most important step is to know who your customer is. Be able to empathize with them, understand what their needs are and what their problems are. And it's best to not just include them early on when you're trying to understand the problem. It's super important that you bring them along on the journey, beyond just validating the solution space, actually validating all your proposals, testing them out, and then actually measuring real usage out in the wild. It's incredibly important, and there's a lot of pitfalls that teams often hit when they don't talk to customers enough. There's a really great book that my team read a few years ago called Customers Included, and it's full of really interesting case studies on where teams, whether they be just one or two people or gigantic corporations like, you know, like a Walmart, where they kicked off a project and they didn't properly include customers on their journey, and the thing that they were working on ended up failing for a number of reasons. And so, you know, if you're looking for why including your customer is important and areas where other teams may have failed, this is a really great read. I recommend it. So my next advice might seem counterintuitive. Listen to your customers, but don't listen to your customers. And what I mean is that customers know what their problems are. They know how they try to solve their problems today, but you can't expect them to come up with a solution, right? They are, what's key is to empathize and understand how they try to solve their problems and how painful it is for them. But ultimately, you're a PM, your job is to take in all of these signals and formulate a solution that will work for everybody. Now, a customer will tell you what they think the right solution is, and you should take them very seriously, but you should not take them literally. It's key to understand the nuggets of their idea and how that should be distilled into a real solution that can help everybody. The next one is really be obsessed with the problem solving, not the solution. And this is something I see a lot of teams do, where they work with customers early on, they distill the problem, but very early on, they come up with a solution. And as PMs, you're paid to come up with solutions and deliver them. But it's very easy to get focused on just that solution. And during the product development cycle, you're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to make compromises. You're going to have to potentially take on new requirements or shave off other requirements. And over time, you end up delivering this solution, and you kind of come up for air after building.
It's a seminar. Come.
After working on this product for multiple months or quarters, and you find out that the thing that you built isn't really solving the problem. The performance is bad, or it's just not quite dialing into the original problem you were looking into. And a really good example of this is a company called Juicero. Some folks may have heard a story about this company. And, you know, they were trying to solve a legitimate problem that, you know, juicing is good for you, but it's kind of a pain. You have to buy fresh fruit and vegetables. You got to chop it. You got to clean it. You got to put it in the machine. The machine's loud. It takes up a bunch of space. Then you have to clean it. You know, it's a real pain. And, you know, they saw, hey, there's also kind of Keurig is a pretty big thing in the coffee industry to make these single pod coffees. And they thought, hey, let's see if we can make something just as easy. But the ideation around the problem kind of stopped there. They developed this super expensive machine. It was originally $699. It was Wi-Fi connected for some reason. Every packet cost around $6. They had a shelf life of 8 days. It had this barcode on it that could scan it and the machine would deny it if it was expired. And they over-engineered it to no end. And one of the things that they realized once they started getting into customers' hands and once reviewers started to look at it is that it was just as easy just to cut it open and squeeze it into a cup. They've actually done studies. They found out that a customer couldn't even tell the difference between the two. And so what they ended up building was a super expensive machine that can just squeeze a juice box, right? You don't need to spend $700 and buy these proprietary bags to do that. So, hey, the problem was super legitimate. Juicing is kind of a pain, but they ended up building something that was way over-engineered, very expensive, and much worse than just buying a thing of juice from the grocery store. So again, focus on the problem. Don't get obsessed too much with the solution. Continually check your solution against the problem that you're looking at. The next thing that I find to be super important and something that I face a lot as well is try to talk to more than one customer. It's hard to find a customer who will come on that journey with you, but oftentimes you find one customer and you get super excited and you spend all your time with them, but it's very quick to fall into this trap of building a point solution. And a point solution is something that is really meant for one specific customer and how they work. And businesses need point solutions. They build line of business apps internally to solve these problems. But as a product manager, when you're trying to build a product for everyone, make sure you talk to more customers because you may find out that it's great for customer A, but it's not so great for customers B through Z. Try to diversify the types of customers that you talk to. And the last thing, be inclusive during your solution process. People come from different countries, they have different cultures, they speak different languages, they have different accessibility needs. You need to spend really the extra energy to ensure that your product feels great for everyone, not just for what you understand or where your team is located. This is something that I actually faced early on in my career. The first feature I ever built as a full-time Microsoft employee on Windows Phone was the ability to turn off notifications on a particular text message. We called it mute conversation. And our team took that term and we put the strings in the product and we localized it for all the languages that Windows supports. But soon our world readiness team followed up to me and said, hey, it turns out that this string is actually offensive to those who can't speak in certain languages, people that are called a mute in certain languages. And it was super offensive. And it was something that we never really thought about because in the English language, that's a very common a common string is to mute something. And we had to work with the team to make sure that we can translate it in a way that made sense for every single country that we shipped. And you can see here is kind of a bad example where someone didn't localize a sign. It's important that you don't take the thing that you understand at face value and then try to just proliferate it across all cultures, all languages. You really need to spend that extra energy to make sure that what you're building is great for everybody. Okay, so I'm going to just pause for a second. I'd love to hear from some of you. I know there's a lot of PMs in the room. What are some ways that you have included customers during your product development cycle? Are there any tips that you have used to bring them along for the journey, to maybe recruit them, to get insights from them? I'd love to hear from some folks over chat. User voice, yeah, that's a good one. That's a service that we use within Microsoft to collect ideas. And it's like Reddit, you can upvote and downvote things and find the ones that really pop. Yeah, that's a great one. User testing. Appliance testing, yeah. I mean, if you can find a small audience, try to validate things early with them. Absolutely. Interviews, yep. Market research, go and talk. Yeah, get out on the streets, try to recruit people, fill out surveys. Yeah. When to the homes? Yeah, it's you end up learning a ton just spending time on the site. I developed a feature on Teams called targeting. It was the ability to be able to send a message and notify a very specific set of people. And we were building it in a way that would work well for very specific industries. And I got to spend time with retail customers on the floor of the store. We spent time in hospital systems. We actually spent time with doctors to understand how they use the product. Very often people tell you how they think they use a solution or how they think it should work, but it's super helpful to go down and actually spend time watching them do the thing that they do every single day. Very nice. Okay, so moving on, start simple and be curious. Your job as a PM is to research and develop solutions and stand strongly behind them. Again, like you're paid to make decisions, but we often get things wrong. And I found that, you need to keep an open mind, but have those strong opinions to start. Have those strong opinions, but hold them loosely. If new data comes in, new opinions come in that challenge your opinion, it's very good to keep an open mind and continually learn and continually to iterate over time rather than making a stance early on and then shutting out all information that comes around you. Next thing, super important, don't fly blind. Measure and experiment. We're going to have hypotheses early on in the product development cycle, but it's key to measure what matters, ensure that your success criteria for a given feature or product is well understood, and it's backed by real user telemetry and by goals. And if you can, experiment. One of the beauties of working in a SaaS world, software as a service world, is that you can flight changes quickly. You can even flight a control and a treatment and actually run experiments and scorecards and see which one performs. There's times where we're all sitting in the office, we all think we know what's best, but there's times where we can't decide between a few different treatments, a few different strains, which one's more clear, a few different information architecture decisions. Being able to flight those out to customers and actually see which ones are moving the needle and helping you accomplish your goals is incredibly powerful. The next thing, start simple and iterate. A great way to reduce backward steps is to start as simple as possible, reduce your variables, and test your hypothesis with minimal variance. It will help you avoid massive amounts of throwaway and massive amounts of step backwards. What I'm showing here are representations of two different ways of building software, how teams end up building and deploying software. The first one is waterfall, and the second one is agile. Waterfall is really great. Is there a question? I think someone just unmuted. The first one is waterfall, and that's great when you have a very specific defined date and a very specific set of goals, and you work as a team to mark towards those goals. The second one is agile, where you work in smaller chunks and you continually measure and adjust over time. And look, I'm not saying waterfall is always the wrong thing to do. There's times where you're deploying software on a device, for example, and you need to hit that manufacturing date and you need to meet a certain bar. You don't have that freedom to continually update and measure. But if you do have that freedom and you have the ability to ship in smaller chunks and try to test the smallest thing possible, that's something I really recommend rather than trying to jam in too much at once. And then you kind of muddy up your first version and you end up muddying up your experiments. And the last one, learn from past mistakes. There's a lot of things, especially when you join a well-established company, there's things that you may have tried in the past or that your peers may have tried in the past. Try to leverage the experience of others. And if you have to fail, fail fast. Fail quickly, learn, and adjust over time. Like our friend Thomas Edison here. Okay, great. Moving on. PM is not a solo sport. This is a really important one that took me a bit to realize as a PM. It's not a game of solitaire. It's all about the team. When I was a early PM, I would try to sit in my office and close the door and try to write the perfect spec. Okay, I would work on it until it was perfect, and then I would come to the team with that document and say, hey, this is the way that we're going to do it, and it's perfect. But I found that in doing so, I missed just a bunch of crucial details that could have been mitigated if I met with my team often. And not only will it help you find those problems, it'll also help you practice the pitch and really nail the sell that you're trying to do for your particular product. I worked for a VP for a couple of years on Windows who called this term Seinfelding. The idea was that Jerry Seinfeld would work on his material every single day before he went on the road and he toured or he filmed a special and released it on Netflix. He would continually try it. Even if it was bad in the beginning, he would do his material every single day and he would keep working on it until he got it right. And that's why we call it Seinfelding in our organization. We continually tried to Seinfeld our pitches, Seinfeld our specs, Seinfeld our vision until we really got it right. And we found all of those key issues that need to be identified early on. The next one is be open and assume positive intent. If you want to receive constructive feedback, you need to be open to receive it. Especially, in a COVID world where a lot of feedback is sent asynchronously over text and you can't really see people, you can't really, judge their facial expressions. It's hard to gauge intent, and you can think that someone's attacking you or attacking something that you've done. But it's important to take a step back and assume the positive intent. Your peers, your management, your leadership team are there to help you. They're there to deliver a great product. And if you close yourself off, you'll start to not receive that feedback. And then you'll end up hitting this world where you can't really Seinfeld properly and get the feedback that's open. So, try to be positive, assume the positive intent. The next thing is fill your bench with advocates. And this is something that you get by pitching your product continually. And as you get more and more feedback, you can bring these partners along for the ride. you don't want your pitch, your feature, the thing you're working on to be, me versus them. You don't want to be your thing versus the rest of the organization. You want partners who can actually advocate for you, even if you're not in the room or they're talking to other people and they're trying to connect another initiative to your initiative. It's great to have people that can represent your feature, represent your own vision as a team. It's super important that you bring these people along with you, especially those that are different disciplines. You want your developers and you want your designers, everyone that you work with, you want them to feel like that they're bought in. They understand why they're doing it, and they can evangelize that across to all of their peers as well. Fill your bench, bring people with you. And the last thing, pay it forward. You're going to get great feedback if you give your own feedback. Advocate for others, become an advocate on their bench as well. To be a team player, it's not all about receiving. You have to give great feedback as well and help advocate for others. Okay, I'd love to hear from everyone again. So what are some other great benefits that maybe I haven't talked about that you can get from soliciting feedback from peers or partners? Or maybe what are some good strategies to reduce the brick walls in front of you and receive some of that positive feedback? More ideas they advocate for you. Yeah, build relationships through one-on-ones. Yeah, a very low stakes situation in a one-on-one. There's not a lot of room for judgment. You can really get that feedback from one person at a time. Align understanding on feedback. Yep. Self-awareness and humility. Absolutely. And there's little tricks that I've learned too when I am trying to get feedback from someone one-on-one, is that I make it clear that I want their feedback because I treasure their expertise and I treasure their opinion. I use the term all the time, like I want to pick your brain. It makes people know that, like, hey, I know there's something in your head that I value. I want to leverage that and make it a part of the product cycle, make sure that it makes everything that we work on great. Yeah, next time you're not in the room, they're going to talk about you positively. Absolutely, and that's what you want. All righty, think beyond the MVP. So once you've gotten your plans together, it's time to start building. It's time to work with your devs, your engineers, to actually start building the product. And something that I found to be super helpful is obsessively try to scope and stage your solution. Again, you don't want to deliver one giant chunk. You want to deliver it in small pieces at a time. And we call this stage the MVP, the minimal viable product. And this enables you to get to the market quickly and learn from real users. And when you kick off that journey, you want to make it real as possible. You want to make your solution as real as possible early on. And we call this, at least in Microsoft, dog fooding. Even if the food tastes bad, you want to eat it so that you can eat it on behalf of your customers, so that by the time they use it, it's great. And we find that when you get the product in your hand, there's so many nuances that you don't quite pick up when you're looking at a design or you're writing a spec. There's something magical about having it in your hands. And it also helps instill confidence in your partners and your leadership team that you're making it real and you're actually paying the thing forward that you asked for. Especially at a big company, like Microsoft, where you're dependent on other teams delivering things for you. When they deliver things for you and they don't actually see the fruits of their labor, it can be pretty demoralizing. So by showing them the actual thing that they can use and show them how they helped you and how they helped deliver a part of the product, it's super powerful. So although you want to make it real as quickly as possible, it's really key not to accrue too much near-term engineering debt. And I see this a lot all the time too, where folks are trying to meet a deadline or they're trying to get that MVP out the door, but they end up taking a ton of compromises in their V1 and they have to pay off that debt in the V2 or the V3 very soon after they deliver that first wave. And what happens is that by the time they need to deliver the next feature beyond the MVP, they end up having to re-architect or rebuild things that they could have built the right way in the first place. And something that should have been a small amount of time to deliver the next feature ends up taking much longer, or sometimes 2, 3, 4 times as long, because they have to re-architect. Like, don't stuff all of the trash in the closet. Make sure that as a PM, you should know what's on your roadmap. You should know what's coming soon over the next few months and quarters. And as your developers and even your designers are making decisions, it's key to make sure that what you're doing is future-proofing. You need that insurance policy so that you don't end up having to pay off that debt soon after you release the first version. The next, and this is a little counterintuitive, but it's a really a key balance, that you want to kick the can on long-term problems. So there are some short-term problems. You should ingest those things in the immediate and not accrue too much debt. but there's some things that are very future looking, like enormous scale or modularizing the code base or making it a platform. That there are things that are important in the fullness of time, but there are things that may not become real problems for several quarters or several years. And those complexities, you need to have the confidence to sweep some of those under the rug. And it's a delicate balance, when to pay off the debt now versus kick the can. But it's important for things that aren't going to end up biting you in the near term. You are able to push those complexities out of the way so you can actually still deliver a product relatively quickly. And the last one, and this is a term that we use a lot on our team actually, is don't move the cheese. And this is something too, when you move between V1, V2, and V3, users get pretty habitual with an app or with a product. They know, what a button does, where that button is, how to configure something, how to use something. And if in V2 you have to build a feature and that causes you to have to move buttons around or move where certain hooks are in the product, people then end up losing confidence in the product and they get super confused. And so a part of future-proofing the product is also future-proofing the experience. Make choices today so that you don't have to move things around and confuse people later on, right? Like here's an example of someone just put a bunch of bricks in front of that door. People got habituated to using that door and they just threw bricks in front of it and they have to find another door. This happens a lot when you're building a product. So be sure, try not to move the cheese as much as you can, especially in quick succession. All right. The last one, be flexible and be fungible. As a PM, you are ultimately the product router. Your job is to connect a bunch of bespoke pieces and bring them all together to deliver one product. Your customers shouldn't know that you work with all these people. They shouldn't know that there's a bunch of different disciplines working together. It's one company, one product team delivering one product. And this is something that I actually look for when I interview PMs. Do they have the muscles to lean into all three of these areas, design, engineering, and business? Because ultimately, you don't have to be an expert on all of these, but it's really helpful to talk the talk and successfully route between all of these pieces to deliver that product together. And one of your jobs as the router is to jump in and fill the gaps. There's a multitude of reasons why the ball will get dropped. And to launch and sustain a successful product, PMs need to be willing and eager to roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty, and do the work that isn't necessarily a part of their scope or their job description. Ultimately, again, you're delivering one product. If one of your partners needs help or there's an area that you're not getting enough traction and your product success relies on it, get ready to roll your sleeves up. It's a big part about being a PM, is leaning outside of your comfort zone and helping pull the team and the product together. And this is a similar note to what I just mentioned. Think beyond your scope and role. There's times where you'll discover those holes and they're outside of your domain. And that's where it's helpful to think outside of your area, right? There's a lot of different PMs and a lot of different teams working to deliver a product. And it's a balance. You don't want to step on people's toes and design someone else's area or tell them how it should work. But if you find that an area that you rely on isn't meeting your own customers' needs or meeting your own success criteria, you should feel empowered to lean forward and really collaborate with these other teams to instill some of the knowledge that you've learned as you've worked with your customers. You don't want to step on those toes. Again, you want to trust your partners, but you should feel empowered to lean in. And the last one, and this is a mantra that I've learned over time from a lot of my own managers, is to have this mantra of trust but verify. There's a ton of moving pieces when developing a product. Even if you trust the people that you work with, and there's existing processes that should hold true in order to deliver that product, you always want to question and verify. I've been burned before. I've seen other people get burned where they make assumptions early on, or they feel like something's getting done the way that it should be. And then when they're in the final mile and they're trying to push the product out the door, they find these holes and they're blindsided. And it's super painful. It's always worth asking that question multiple times rather than getting burned later down the line. Trust your partners. They're working as hard as they can. They're hopefully well qualified for the jobs that they're in, but verify so that you're not surprised later on. Love to hear from everyone again. I talked about a lot of the skills that I treasure as a PM and some of the roles that I've worked with as a PM. Just in your own experience and from the teams that you have worked with, what other skills do you think are important for PMs to brush up on to be as fungible as possible and lean in outside of their comfort zone? Time management, absolutely. Like that's one of those soft skills that people don't really talk about. There's not a role for time management, but you want to make sure that you don't lose track of it. Empathy, communication, presentation. Yeah. Empathy is huge. some of these skills that, there's not a chief empathy officer necessarily, or someone whose job is just to have empathy. These are the soft skills that you have to work on over time. Growth mindset, absolutely. Influence without power, especially when you start off early. Curiosity, active listening, absolutely. Ownership. Being okay with not knowing everything. Yeah. Early on, you want to be the best PM as you can be, especially when you're new to the company. But there's times where, hey, you're not going to know everything, and that's okay. You shouldn't know everything. If every single PM operated the way I did, there would be tons of holes, and we wouldn't be operating as well as we can. You want a diverse PM set, a diverse workforce, so that we can work together and deliver one great product. All right. So just to wrap up, this isn't the end all be all. These are just some of the big things that I've learned. If you ask me again in a few years, my list might look completely different. But when Darsh kind of reached out and said, what are some of the things that you wish you could have told yourself as a new PM? These are really the things that I've picked up on over the last 8 years at Microsoft that have been incredibly helpful for me. And across all of these, people is incredibly important. It's one of the most important variables for your own happiness and for the success of your product. Find great people, find great mentors, find great advocates, people that will advocate for you and advocate for your product. Find great partners. Next, if you're going to fail, and I promise you, you will eventually fail. It's not necessarily going to be a huge failure. It'll be these micro failures. I fail all the time, but if you're going to fail fast. Learn from it. Be agile, pay it forward, and do better next time. Next one is keep listening. Always listen to customers, partners, peers, your leadership team, people with experience, people that maybe don't have experience and they have a fresh set of eyes. I work with dozens and dozens and dozens of PMs that I really respect. And I have one-on-ones with so many of them. I pick their brain about things from product to process to people management, all those things. It's incredibly important. Leverage the people that are around you, leverage their expertise. And lastly, as a new PM, keep asking why, whether it be about a process that your team has, a precedence for why things are the way that they are, or a solution. Keep asking why until you get to the root of any problem. One of the greatest benefits of being a new PM or being new to a company is to not have those blinders up and have a fresh perspective. Ask why, challenge the status quo, and continue to find new ways to make the product or your team even better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was really good. Like initially when I went through the presentation, I was like, okay, I can relate to that, but I think your energy makes it like 10 times more better. And like while you were speaking, I was getting so many messages that, wow, this is like amazing. I didn't realize this. So thanks a lot for spending your time on Saturday morning to help out with us. And moving along, like I personally learned a lot, and I hope you guys also did in the audience. You can connect with Nat, follow Mark on LinkedIn, and we'll be moving to our Q&A section. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hands using the Zoom raise hand feature. I see we have Mike's hand up. Mike, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, hey, Mark. I was curious about what you mentioned with trusting but verifying. And so I imagine that it's simpler that once you've already established rapport with the team, you kind of know when you have to step in and trust and verify. But within the balance of working with the new team and around not micromanaging and trusting but verifying, what are some key advanced indicators that suggest that a new squad or team might require a little bit extra trusting but verifying?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times where a team is kind of leaning outside of their own comfort zone to help you deliver things. It might be something that's not super well established, or maybe there's not a great process or mechanism to even verify. A well-established team will have ways of tracking work, and they'll have entry and exit criteria that you can lean on specifically. But new teams sometimes don't have all those processes in place, and they rely on a bit of social engineering. And I find that in general, I always try to trust but verify. Like I try to trust that the work item, the work tickets that they're tracking are accurate. And so I'll say in general, to verify, that doesn't mean that you need to micromanage. You can be super respectful and do it in a soft way. But there are teams that sometimes don't have those mechanisms there, and when they don't have it, and there's not a window into how they're operating and how they've actually delivered, or maybe I'm just not aware of it, I will especially try to verify. And there's times where rather than continually ask, I'll teach them, how do I fish? How do I look at your telemetry? How do I look at your release notes? How do I dog food your end of the product so that I can verify for myself?
Thank you, Mark. Our next question is from Idol. I hope I pronounced your name right. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. Hey, Mark. So my question is, what advice would you give to yourself, like yourself who started working as a PM for the first time? Like, what's one thing that you wish you knew then?
I think the biggest thing is asking for feedback. Honestly, like I think early on I wanted to prove myself, and I thought the best way to work on something was to, write the perfect document like I had mentioned. But people, like, experience is worth more than almost anything. There's a lot of tactical skills that you can learn as a PM, but at the end of the day, you're often going into a new industry and you're working on a new code base, you're working on a new product, and people have failed before. And especially working in the SMS and MMS space on Windows Phone, there's like standards here, right? Like there's not a lot of subjectivity. There's a standard for how SMS and MMS has to work. And there's times where I'd go in, super confident. I'm like, this is the way it should work. And then all of my peers would be like, no, Mark, like according to section 4.2, this is against the code and this will get the product blocked by AT&T, right? And so that's probably the biggest thing. And it was a muscle that I really had to work on early on. And I had burned a lot of time trying to build the perfect thing. But I found that working with people one-on-one, even setting expectations, saying, hey, this is just a brainstorm, this is just a brain dump, or these are just some sketches that I have, what do you think? You don't have to have the perfect, art piece to get feedback. You can get feedback from the smallest fidelity set of content, and it's always incredibly helpful. So, I mean, out of all of this, that's probably the biggest thing that I had to learn as a PM.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty useful. Like, I think I'm also gonna keep that in mind a lot. Okay, next up, we have Dipayan. Dipayan, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Hey, thanks, Darsh. Hey, hi, Mark. Nice to meet you, and thanks for sharing your insights. I am an ex-Microsoftie, and I am right now in University at Buffalo studying my master's. So the question I have for you is, particularly if you talk about Microsoft Teams, Teams is both a B2C as well as a B2B product. Like I was in the Microsoft consulting services industry where you used to leverage Microsoft Teams and build applications for our enterprise clients. So, we used to have user voice where users used to write their comments, and then you used to speak with customers to gain feedback. So as a Teams PM lead, how do you prioritize? How do you prioritize between B2C customers and B2B customer requirements? And what is the framework and strategy you guys follow to build your product roadmap? That if you share a few examples or insights, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we have a team called our QCO team, our quality and customer obsession team, that their entire job is to help find customers and help distill these insights and actually make the connections between us and the customer. But user voice is incredibly important. It's a great signal, but I found that it's often like Amazon reviews. It's like the 90% of it is the loudest 5% of people. And it's always people that are a little more tech literate, right? And you don't want to necessarily build a product just for that one audience. And so, I found that all of these are just data points and signals. The best thing that you can do to learn is from real usage. And that's where experimenting and using telemetry is probably the strongest tool, right? People will tell you what they think they want, but when you look at real usage and you actually have to experiment with real solutions, that's where the key nuggets come. So that's one. And then for things that are a little bit more nascent that you haven't really delivered yet, spending time actually on the floor, like I had mentioned, I spent time with multiple retail customers and multiple hospitals when I was developing our targeted communication story on Teams. And the things that I learned from their chief information officers at headquarters was different from the employees that I met with when I was actually on the floor. Right? Even companies don't know quite what they want, right? They think they know what their employees need, but you need to spend time with those actual employees that are going to use the tool. So I try to find those opportunities to use real data and also spend time personally with customers.
Great, awesome, thanks. I guess I remember that when Zoom had introduced the breakout rooms, and I remember that when we used to do the campus hires onboarding sessions and Teams lagged that, and then Teams release that feature pretty soon. I remember that that feature was really well perceived by all of us because we were right in the beginning of COVID, and we were relying on that feature to, do those onboarding sessions for the new hires. So yeah, that seems like a 1 year past, but yeah, it's been a 10.
It's
Thanks,
been a
Mark.
it's been a very busy year. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for the question, Deepan. And for those who listen to this question, I would recommend, if you don't know about, look into user experience. That's a whole field about how you build your products around users and user needs, no matter if it's internal, external, business, consumer. Next up, we have Milind. Milind, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hey, Mark. Yeah, just thank you very much for taking the time to talk to all of us today. So in terms of my situation right now, I'm actually just in the first couple months of a year-long PM internship during my gap year. And this is my first, kind of step really into PM. And so I'm learning a lot of new things, and a lot of the advice that you kind of brought up were definitely things that I resonate with and stuff that I see myself implementing as well. Just from your experience of kind of, being in the same company and seeing yourself, working with, I guess, similar types of people in a similar environment, what were some of the first things that you actually realized yourself, like the first realizations that, hey, I'm actually getting better at this, like PM is meant for me and my skills are really, developing here? Like, what's one of the first things that, really made you hit it off that, yeah, this is meant for me, this is what I was, put here to do?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like when I first interviewed for the PM internship, it kind of shocked me that I hadn't thought about this before. Like, I'm not the strongest dev in the world. I started coding freshman year. It was, it was a hard first start. Especially a lot of my peers have been developing since like high school or middle school, and I was like, I can't catch up. But it's something that I always enjoy. I think it's a good thing to keep working on. I think the worst thing I can do is never code again, and I kind of throw away all the stuff that I spent so much time studying. But really, there's things that I enjoy outside of engineering, like design. I actually went into school planning to major in technical theater and lighting design. That was my plan. I was really into that in high school, and I went to a talk during orientation freshman year about computer science, and I'd always been a big techie, and so I thought, I'm like, yeah, this is probably a better move for me. And so there's key pieces around design and helping hold people's hands through experiences. And kind of theater is a big part of that, right? You're helping transform someone outside of their seat in the auditorium into a different world. And some of those soft skills and hard skills around design. And then also, I took a tech entrepreneurship class, and there are things around understanding users and being able to market to them. I started to realize that, at least at Microsoft, I've only worked full time at Microsoft, so I can't speak with full authority, for all PMs, but I found that Microsoft has a good mixture of engineering, design, and business. And those are kind of the three areas that I really love. And I love to lean across all of them. And so after my first internship, kind of the light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, oh, this is the perfect role for me. I can kind of satisfy each of these, three areas that I really love to do.
Thank you for the answer, Mark. That's actually pretty useful, especially for those who are starting out as a new grad PM or transitioning into a PM internship. This would be something really good to keep in mind. Our next question is from Shagufta. I hope I pronounced your name right. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hey, hi, I'm Shagufta. Hey, Mark. I started my product management journey with Microsoft. Now I'm heading product in a startup. So I have a question. Basically, I wanted to know your experience, right? So, I mean, when you are a PM, you have to have a synergy with engineering team. But when you have a situation where they wanted to build a cool tech and you wanted to solve a problem, how do you bring the synergy? How do you bring them on the same page that, hey, maybe the coolest tech will not solve the customer problem? So have you ever faced this kind of challenge in your career so far, and how did you tackle that?
I haven't faced it in that big of a way. I mean, I found that most of my peers across disciplines are pretty grounded in solving real user problems. But, for areas where I've solved for that, I think the best thing is to remove subjectivity and make sure that you really are the champion for the user and bring it back to the user constantly. That's another thing I look for when I interview PMs. Like, are they constantly bringing it back to the user? And there's times where, a developer may be making an architectural choice because maybe it's simpler, maybe it's even more performant, but it'll hit certain pitfalls that will end up tanking the experience. And so, part of your job is to always be the advocate for the user, leverage the data that you have, the research that you have, the anecdotes that you have. That's why meeting with customers is so important. Like, out of those 3 customer visits I did across retail and healthcare, that paid dividends for, an entire year. And I was able to share insights outside of my domain, to my leadership team and to my peers. So the best advice I can give is just remove all subjectivity. This shouldn't necessarily be your opinion. The PM, you have to have good judgment, good design judgment, good staging judgment, good engineering judgment. But when it comes to choice and what route you're going to take, as much as you can, leverage data, leverage insights. Don't make it about you or your opinion.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mark. That helps.
Okay, our next question is from Nemo. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for your time here. So I guess I'll introduce a little bit of myself as well. I'm a CS student in my 3rd year, studying at computer science in Georgia Tech. I've actually just finished one of my PM internship at ByteDance, which is a parent company of TikTok. And I was working on actually a competitor software with the Microsoft team, which is called Lark Suite. So this is my first time getting the PM internship as well as business enterprise softwares. And I definitely felt something that's really different. I think as PM, one of the really important things for us is to identify the users and go talk to them. But for business software, users are sort of like this very, different definition as a 2C consumer products, because the people, for example, let's say like work collaboration software, the users, everyday user is going to be the people, the coworker, the employees that's going to be communicating on this platform. But people who are actually paying for the software are the companies, are the decision makers, stakeholder inside the companies. So when I was writing my PRD, like while I was working at ByteDance, I had this issue where it became really troublesome for me to identify my users. Like I either focus on, the individual people who are using my product, but in that sense, I'll kind of neglect how the company is liking this, like how the boss, how the decision maker is doing that. But if I, put too much effort on like pleasing the VIP companies, in that sense, it also neglects how, everyday users are feeling about the product. And that's like where most international come to play. So I was wondering, like, since you have worked in Windows Phone and Microsoft Teams for so long, how do you feel like is the best way to identify like the correct users to serve for product managers working in that space?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's a balance. I found in my time at least that decision makers within companies are usually have a pretty strong level of user empathy, because ultimately, if something's not working great for someone in a company, they're not going to email me necessarily. They're going to email their IT decision maker, right? And so I think they're equally motivated to make people happy. But it is a balance. There's a lot of investment that we do to add the right level of governance, the right level of policy setting for IT. And that's why we have a dedicated team on Teams that is their user type and their targeted user. The targeted user is IT decision makers and those that have to manage teams for their organization. And so from a user empathy perspective, they're the ones that we look to be experts for those particular users. For those that are building features like messaging features, for example, or collaboration features, their focus is much more on the end user, because they're the ones that are going to be leveraging it every single day. Some of those users will be the IT decision makers, most won't be. But I mean, this is where it's really helpful to have strong peers, is that whenever we build a feature, something that we often don't think about, and it takes a little bit of a muscle, especially when we're working on something that's user-facing, is thinking, how will ITs deploy it? How do they want to control it? Are there any safety issues? Especially when we build software for students. Student safety is incredibly important, right? And so, this is where a partnership with this other team that I'd mentioned that focuses solely on IT management is super important. It's hard for a PM to be an expert on every single user type, but as long as you have that diversity within your team and you have someone who can advocate for those types of users, then you can ultimately build something that is great for customers to use. And by default, it works great out of the box, but you have those right knobs and levers so that it's safe and it's easy to deploy.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the question, Nemo. So we have 5 more minutes left, and we'll try to go quickly. So if possible, please ask your questions quickly so that everybody can have a chance at it. So next up, we have Yada. I hope you're pronouncing your name correctly. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. My name's Jada. I'm an incoming PM working on M365, actually, in the Bellevue office. And I guess one of my questions is, how do you plan on a feature for a product in the long term, especially when you have all these other factors like the technical landscape changing, or even something like a global pandemic. I mean, I can imagine that Teams has had an extraordinary year, but it's due to an extraordinary time that no one really knew or even could plan for this kind of thing to happen. So when you're coming up with a PRD or coming up with a spec for a feature, do you think about your feature in like 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And if plans change, how do you adapt to that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. And I think that's something that PMs will have different experiences based on the team they're working on, or maybe how long they've been on the company or what their role is. Very often when I'm working on a net new space that we haven't invested in, and I have to kind of build that empathy of why we're building something, it's not necessarily just like yet another feature, right? We're really building a whole new category. Then it's really healthy to fly at that altitude, that 30,000 foot altitude, and kind of design the story. You sweep a lot of complexity under the rug, and it's all about storytelling, right? You're trying to tell a story of what problems people are facing today, and you kind of form a little bit of blindness around how it's built. You need to be careful. Some executives will look at it and they won't be able to even grok it because it seems way too futuristic. It has to be grounded in some sort of technical reality, but you want to focus a little bit less on the engineering and more on the full story and the full end-to-end experience that you're trying to build. But when it comes to actually building it, this is where, I said that scoping and staging is incredibly important. And I often like to bookend any product pitch or vision piece that I'll do with flying everyone down back to zero and showing them, hey, what is our first step? What's our 6 month, 12 month, 18-month story? Because you don't want people to walk out of the room thinking it's a fairy tale. You want them to at least understand what's next and how we can actually deliver some goodness to customers. Something that you had mentioned, like the pandemic, these things will come up all the time, and it's key to not be too religious about your plans that are 6 months or 12 months in the future. Things will change. The world's going to change. The things that I commit to building in 6 months, the world's going to change, and you need to be willing to put those things on the sideline and focus on where people need your help immediately. This is where being an agile team is incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question is from Niranjan. Do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Hi, Mark. So I have one question. Like Mike, I'm currently a project management student, and I also have worked for 5 and 6 years, out of which, a few years I have been in product manager for civil engineering software company, because my undergraduate was, in civil engineering. But I find this, product management pretty interesting, and also have that taken courses and have been in the past. So if I want to expand my, chances of, having product management in different industry apart from civil engineering or oil and gas, do you think I need to have like even technical skills also, whether it's learning Python or SQL or any other technical skills? Because I already know about agile, lean, and other things, since I have practiced or also done user stories during my previous work. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, having a technical background definitely helps. I've worked though with a ton of PMs that don't have a computer science backgrounds, and you'll start to find that every company basically has their own set of mechanisms and tools that are specific to that company, right? Like you can end up becoming super technically savvy on the inner workings of Microsoft's enterprise stack without having a computer science degree. So it helps. It's a good muscle that I think will help push the flywheel, but that's definitely not a blocker. Something that I recommend though is you have a ton of experience in different fields. And you can find ways that you can be a PM in a similar industry where you have a leg up because you have industry experience. And in the time in that role, you can brush up on those other skills that are important for you to round out. And then, if you want to try a different industry or a different sector, then you can kind of pivot from there. But, you can try to find a seedling of a role where you can leverage your current experience, use that to your best advantage, and then learn on the job.
Thanks, man.
Okay, just a note, we'll be going for 3 more questions and then we'll be stopping. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to connect or follow Mark on LinkedIn, and we'll also have recording of this. With that, Zoe, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I just had a quick question about how you manage your time with meetings. So I'm currently like a product intern at Paramount, and I've found that just so many Zoom meetings prevent me from actually doing like a lot of the things that I'm supposed to do. So I've just been trying to figure out like, should I be coming in earlier before meeting starts, or like working on the weekends? And if you have any tips or strategies for that.
Yeah, this one's hard, especially when you're remote. Like things that used to be a 5-minute conversation of me walking up to someone's desk and tapping them on the shoulders become a 30-minute meeting, and you end up saturating your entire day with meetings. And it's hard, and I'm not great at this. There's times where I feel like there's FOMO if I don't go to every single meeting. It's something I should work on myself. But I found in general, especially when you have conflicts in meetings or you just need time back to get work done, you should think about things that you need to do and only you can do it. Things that you should do, it might not be higher priority and maybe someone else can do it. And things that are good to do, someone else can likely pick it up on your behalf. And I try to prioritize my time accordingly. It's something that, I kind of talk the talk and I don't walk the walk. I'm not very good at it. I try to accept everything. But, in general, if you find that you're not able to get the work that you need to do to be successful in those need to do items, then you start looking at those good to do's and those should do's and maybe blocking them off your calendar.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Varun. Varun, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hey Dash, hi, thanks. Thanks, Mark. So my question is, I'm currently working as a UX designer at a really large startup in India. And one of the problems that we've been facing is how to prioritize tasks for like the upcoming quarter. So we follow a democratic process where everyone has a say in sort of which tasks get picked up. But because of the composition of the team, there are fewer designers. There's even 4 QA people, but there's a lot of people in tech. So the formula we used to follow was a combination of business impact, customer impact, and effort. But because the developers were so many that anything that required high effort used to just get pushed down the pipeline. So I was just wondering how you deal with such things at Microsoft. Is the process democratic, and who's responsible? How do you deal with this?
Yeah, the process is very democratic. I mean, we have our own processes to measure, like you had said, business impact, things that are commitments that maybe we've made to customers. And we use that to stack rank our plans, every month, every quarter. But, when you start talking about it at a per task basis, I'm pretty cognizant of not having designers or even PMs burn a bunch of time on things that maybe won't be coded up soon, right? I try to focus on the things that are used to unblock development and unblock goodness to customers. You can have a designer work on something for 2 months or a PM work on a spec and then maybe gets deprioritized or it's not picked up for 3 months, which is kind of demoralizing. But also by the time you're ready to pick it up, it could be so stale that they have to redo it anyway. And so I try to focus on what's going to unblock the pipeline. That's kind of my main focus when I'm prioritizing time, either my own time or my peers' time.
Okay, that helps. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Awesome. So our last question for the day, Nikhilesh, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm currently like a sophomore studying computer science. I'm working as a developer this summer at a hedge fund, and I got interested in the product space relatively recently. And I was sort of wondering, like, if you're in my position and you sort of look back at your career, how would you sort of validate your experience in product at sort of my stage, or sort of like, how would you explore that interest in a more sort of, I guess, concrete way? Because I guess I don't have like a product, internship this summer, but I wanted to have that exposure early on. Yeah. So how would you validate it, and sort of how would you test that, whether this is something that you'd want to do like long term if you're in my position?
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially at least, my computer science department didn't have a great product management program. But, I found that the classes that I got the most mileage out of are ones that were usually like web app classes where you can build something yourself pretty quickly. And, I try to focus on technologies that can allow you to build something that can get something into people's hands. And that'll allow you to lean a little bit further away from tech and actually building an end-to-end solution, even if it's just a prototype. And so, I would try to leverage your skills, your technical skills, to try to build something real and start to even validate it, bring it out to deploy it, pass it off on, on Reddit and get real usage. That'll allow you to lean more into, design skills and even your own customer empathy and your business skills, and help you, validate if that's something that you enjoy more than building the product and actually developing in the first place.
Okay.
Try to make it real.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. With that, Mark, thank you so much for staying 5 minutes over, but
Yeah.
this was extremely useful. And for everybody who attended, if you like this event, feel free to send a kudos to Mark, and actually feel free to type in the chat out of like 1 on 5. How would you rate this event? I would rate it 5, like it was good for me. But anyways, apart from that, you can feel free to post on LinkedIn about Mark. If you do post, feel free to tag Mark, Product Buds, and also you can share the recording of this event will be on YouTube, and you can share with your friends or any colleagues who you know might be joining as a product manager or PM intern. So that would be extremely useful for others as well. And as always, like we are a community. We often try to help as many people as we can. Feel free to reach out to me or any of my teammates on our Product with Slack, and hope we can help you out. And with that said, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining.